So, depending on what version of which podcast you're listening to, whether it be the video After Dark podcast or the audio version to Boldly Pod, this is kind of going to be a crossover podcast because the subject matter that I want to talk about is something that I've wanted to discuss for quite a while on To Boldly Pod. I just didn't think I really had enough personal knowledge to go on To Boldly Pod to really talk about it. And if you listen to the audio podcast To Boldly Pod, you know that I do those episodes unscripted. I kind of learn about what I want to talk about, and then I just turn on the microphone and go. But since I've started the After Dark podcast, I can kind of react to some of the videos that I'm watching and talk about them, again, unscripted along the way. That's just kind of my shtick for doing podcasts. Not that I can't write a script or that I'm not somewhat knowledgeable about some of the things I talk about. It's just a way that I've chosen to do my podcast, my content creation, if you will. So if you're listening to the To Boldly Pod, you're going to get this entire thing in one lump sum, probably roughly right around a half an hour long. But if you're watching the After Dark version, it's going to be broken up into two separate parts. Why? Because I don't really like to make these videos longer than max 20 minutes because people watching online videos tend to get a little bored when they get a little lengthy. They get a little over, say, 15 minutes, and that's kind of pushing it. Then they get bored and they don't usually end up watching the whole thing. So I'll break the After Dark version up into two, but the audio podcast will be one whole podcast. So, okay, host guy, you've set it up long enough. What are we going to talk about? Well, like I said, something I've really wanted to talk about for quite a while is the alleged Greada Treaty. Don't know what that is? That is the supposed treaty signed between a United States president and a group of aliens. You heard me correctly. This is supposedly a treaty signed between the United States government and an alien species. Keep in mind, during this whole thing, and I'm going to repeat it numerous times, there is no substantial proof to this whole thing. So you have to take it all sort of with a grain of salt. And we'll explain more as we go along. So let's kind of do a TikTok video that I found that kind of gives you sort of the Cliff Notes version of what we're going to talk about.
In 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower allegedly signed a secret agreement with extraterrestrials, the Greada Treaty.
So there's your intro. And it's true, in 1954, President Eisenhower did allegedly sign a treaty with a group of aliens. And what was that treaty all about?
The deal? Advanced technology in exchange for allowing limited human abductions for research.
So there you have it. The aliens give us some of their technology, and in return, Eisenhower agreed to allow them to abduct a certain amount of the citizens of, assuming just America. It's never sort of clarified whether the agreement was for abductions to be worldwide or just here in America. But let us continue.
It's said the meeting took place at Edwards Air Force Base, where tall grays proposed an alliance.
And that's true. Edwards Air Force Base was where this alleged meeting was supposed to happen. And it was between Eisenhower and what we commonly know as the gray aliens. Now, as we go on through this podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about the intricate details that allegedly happened during all of this.
But after breaking the treaty's terms, a shadow war between humans and aliens supposedly began.
Now, the first part of that is standard in the Greada Treaty, that at some point the aliens started abducting more humans than they were supposed to, or the amount they were allotted to abduct and do experiences on. The second part is something new that I'd never heard, that there was this shadow war. But we've kind of talked a little bit about the shadow war on a previous episode of Too Boldly Pod, as you're going to learn here in just a second.
Leading to events like Dulce Base conflicts and deep underground military facilities.
So, yes, the Dulce base we have talked about on Too Boldly Pod, and the underground bases and all of that stuff. If you remember the Too Boldly Pod episode of the Dulce base that we talked about, there are allegedly 7 levels under the Dulce base. I think 7 levels was the amount. And the bottom 2 are aliens only, allegedly.
Dumbs. Officially, it's a myth.
So that's a huge line they make in this video. Officially, it's a myth. That is true, because there's no verifiable proof and or evidence to show that the Greada Treaty is entirely true. But as we move on through this podcast, you're going to hear some of the intricate details of what allegedly happened.
But UFO disclosures and whistleblowers say otherwise. If true, did we make a deal we couldn't control? Follow for more.
So, thank you to Cloaks and Cloakers for that video. And that's a good setup to what we're going to talk about both on After Dark and Too Boldly Pod. The theory, the event that is known as the Greada Treaty. So I'm going to kind of try to break down the timeline of this entire story of the Greada Treaty, including some, I suppose, details that aren't included in any of these videos that I'm sharing. And part of it is going to be sort of a rehash, but we'll kind of take those as we roll along.
Did U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower secretly sign a treaty with aliens in the early 1950s? Well, as the story goes, Eisenhower was on a golf trip in Palm Springs, California on February 20th, 1954.
Okay, so February 1954, President Eisenhower was indeed in Palm Springs, California on a vacation. That is verifiable by sort of the minutes of a presidency are kind of marked down for everybody to see. They know what the president is doing just about every minute of every day. That's why we have presidential records and we have the National Archive and all of that stuff. President's supposed to be the number one employee of the United States, so as us being voters, i.e., employers, we need to keep track of what our employee is doing. It's kind of putting it in a very simplistic manner, but it's actually true. With presidents, everything that they do is sort of kept track of minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. And it's made part of public record. So even when they're on vacation, because when they're president, they're never really on vacation, even when they're taking a break playing golf, like Eisenhower really liked to do to unwind. So that part of this story is actually true. He is in Palm Springs in 1954 on vacation.
After dinner that night, he reportedly made an unscheduled trip to Edwards Air Force Base to meet.
Now, this is where we get into the unverifiable part of this entire Greada Treaty, because there is a gap in Eisenhower's timeline for that day. There's no proof at all that he secretly went to Edwards Air Force Base, but we're going to kind of cover that as we move along about this.
Meet with extraterrestrial beings. At this time, Eisenhower's whereabouts were unknown, and the Associated Press mysteriously reported that President Eisenhower died of a heart attack in Palm Springs. 2 minutes later, the AP retracted that bulletin and reported that the president was indeed still alive.
That part of it is true. Back in 1954, the AP did in fact report that Eisenhower had passed away due to having a heart attack. And then just a few minutes later, they retracted it, stating that they were ill-informed and he was not in fact dead. They just didn't know where he was. So they kind of jumped the gun there, or maybe some kind of informant told them that or something. It's never been clarified, but that part of the story is actually true. There is a missing period of time where President Eisenhower is unaccounted for, and the AP, for whatever reason, released a statement claiming that he died, only to retract it just a few minutes later. The next part is the story that we kind of get from the government about his absence.
The very next morning, his spokesman announced to the press that the president had simply visited a dentist the previous night because he'd chipped a tooth while eating a chicken wing at dinner.
So that part is, again, that's a true part of this day of President Eisenhower's presidency in 1954. That was the explanation that was given the following day about where nobody knew where he was, that he chipped a tooth and had to go to an unscheduled visit to the dentist to get it repaired. That part's on the record.
That same morning, he attended a church service in Los Angeles. Could it be that what Eisenhower experienced the night before shook him so deeply to his core that he had to reconsider his beliefs?
And thank you to the TikTok page Saucer for that video. It was actually a really well done video using AI. And that is true. The following morning, everything was back to normal. Eisenhower went to church and everything seemed fine, with the explanation of having a chipped tooth from a chicken wing. And everything sort of moved forward from there until a few years later, about 20, 25 years later, people started to talk, and this story surfaced about Eisenhower on that day didn't chip a tooth. He actually went to Edwards Air Force Base and had a meeting with a group of aliens where in which the Greada Treaty was signed.